Special thanks to all of you for taking the time to come here this afternoon to listen to what I've entitled as the Society of Jesus' Response to Refugees. What I would like to do this afternoon is three things. Talk a little bit about the refugee situation in the world today. Second, to talk about how the Society's response was really inspired by Father Pedro Arrupe's vision and experience of Jesuits needing to be part and parcel of the world that we live in, especially those most in need. And finally, begin, and hopefully through the question and answers, get into what difference this might make for us, whether here in the United States or here in the world, how we can respond to this situation. When I give a talk like this, I always want to begin with a story of a refugee family that I have met. So I would like to invite you to imagine that you are in northern Myanmar. I think we're all aware of the Rohingya crisis, the Rohingya community, which was forced to leave Myanmar and is now in Bangladesh. But there are similar ethnic tensions going on all through Myanmar with tribal groups, many of whom are Christian and Catholic, and especially the Kachin community in the northernmost part of Myanmar. Late last year, about a year ago, I visited a refugee camp there and met a Catholic family, actually a husband and wife. And they told me the story, how this was the third camp that they had been living in. Previous camps had become too dangerous. One daughter had been left behind to do studies, another boy was in the town trying to make a living. And they told me quite movingly, they said, "We know that our house is still there, but it's not safe to go back. Please pray for us." And so I have one of those little index cards of people that I pray for daily, and this couple is always on my list of people that I pray for, that they and so many others like them get the chance to go back home, and if that is not possible, find a home where they are welcomed and given the opportunity to live as faith-filled and hopeful human beings. Let me just give a few facts about the refugee situation right now. There are approximately, at the end of 2017, 68.5 million forcibly displaced people throughout the world. People have been forced to leave their homes for any number of reasons, whether it be natural disasters, such as have just happened in Indonesia and the Philippines, war, ethnic conflict, drug sales, etc. Of that 68 million, about 21 million are considered refugees, people who have left their own country to find safety somewhere else. The largest number, about 40 million, are people who have been displaced within their own countries. They're often called internally displaced people. Combined with this are individuals who are seeking asylum in different countries because of personal things that have happened to them. Perhaps they're a journalist who has needed to leave the country for safety reasons. In that number, the needs are often great, and the needs are often overwhelming. The 5 largest countries right now, just to give you a bit of a snapshot, Syria is obviously the largest. Over 6 million people displaced in the country itself, another 6.5 million outside of the country. Colombia is the second largest with 7.7 million displaced people, mostly inside the country itself. And that country is now bearing the first wave of people leaving Venezuela. The third country is Afghanistan, with an equal number of people displaced inside and out. South Sudan, many of us have heard about over the past couple of years, the sort of civil war going on there. And finally, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been in an ongoing war state for 50 years and has a huge number of internally displaced people. That's the world of refugees, and that's the world that the Jesuit Refugee Service is working in. Last year we served 640,000 people, about 1 in every 100 refugee or forcibly displaced person. We are active in 53 countries. There are about 70 Jesuits involved, about 1,200 staff, 1,900 staff people, a number of volunteers, a number of refugees themselves working with us. What is the Jesuit angle on this? How did the society even get involved in this issue of working with refugees? We have to go back to Father Pedro Arrupe, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus in the 60s and 70s into the early 80s. Father Arrupe was the founder of JRS, giving us a mission to accompany, serve, and advocate with and for displaced people around the world. I think as many of you know, Father Arrupe, before he became the Father General, was a missionary in Japan. And I think his experience of being a missionary there, especially a missionary during World War II, very much formed why the society is involved in refugee work in the way that we are. At that point, he was the novice director, welcoming new Jesuits in Hiroshima. He was there when the bomb dropped. He had been previously a medical student, and so he spent a lot of time going around helping people in the aftermath of the atomic bomb, not knowing, as no one knew at that point, that there was ultimately not much that he could do for people who were dying of radiation sickness. But out of that experience of accompanying people, a deep sense of being present as Christ to people, whether they believed or not, that, I believe, stayed with him and very much formed his ministry as the Superior General, and certainly the leadership that he showed the Society of Jesus in engaging the world as it is. Even if we can't fix it, even if we can't make it perfect, to engage the world as it is. I think his experience, which helped form JRS, was also very much his experience of being a Jesuit in Japan. The Catholic Church represents a very small percentage of people there. I think it's about 2% or less. Our ministry there has always been much more one of presence, especially educational presence, than one of conversion or preaching. In the same way, the Society of Jesus in Japan has always been international. He himself was Basque. The current provincial of the Japanese province originally came from Argentina. He knew that in times of great need, the whole society needed to come together, as they did post-World War II. I believe it's out of this experience especially of accompanying people during Hiroshima, that Father Arrupe was inspired to found JRS in response to the Vietnamese boat people crisis in 1980. As he says, his heart was moved with pity to see what was happening to the Vietnamese people leaving their country. A third of them were dying on the water, either drowning or falling victim to pirates. And he felt that we needed to respond somehow. And that somehow was to offer what he said an accompaniment of refugees, especially Vietnamese refugees living in camps all over Asia. And he asked JRS to be an organization that was human, pedagogical, and spiritual. That if we were going to serve refugees, we needed to do it humanly, pedagogically, and spiritually. This is what JRS tries to do, and I think it's what makes us somewhat distinguished in terms of other groups who are serving refugees at this time. Let me briefly take those three qualities, which I think are also very Ignatian qualities: human, pedagogical, spiritual. For Father Arrupe and for us, the most important thing about working with refugees is to accompany them, to walk with the people we serve. As I said, our motto is accompany, serve, advocate. Father Arrupe's experience of Hiroshima tells us today that the most important thing that we can do is to be present, is to walk with people in their very difficult stories. It is out of that walking with people, it is out of that listening to what they say they need that we develop our programs. I always tell people JRS will never be the most efficient refugee serving program. The most efficient programs are cookie cutters. They do the same thing wherever they go. We offer a broad range of services, from psychosocial work to education to healthcare to emergency to reconciliation, trying to meet the needs of the people that we walk with. What gives me the most pleasure, and I have visited 37 of the 53 countries that we are serving in, what gives me the most pleasure is when agencies and when other people tell us, you know, what makes JRS different is that you are close to the people. One refugee recently put it this way, Father, the other groups drive through the camps. JRS walks through the camps. And I'm always grateful when I hear that, because I think it's a very Ignatian quality to be very much present in the world, to realize that God can be at work in those very mundane moments of talking with people, of listening to people, of sharing their stories. It's out of that experience that something good can happen, whatever that next step is supposed to be. That's the human side. Pedagogical. My God, we're the Jesuit Refugee Service. How could we not be doing education? We would not be true to our mission, I don't think. We've got 450 years of doing this in various forms. And that being said, education with refugees has some particular qualities to it. In particular, most of the children and young people that we are dealing with and the adults we serve in other educational projects are coming with a fair amount of trauma. The trauma that forced them to leave their homes, the trauma that they have experienced along the road. For us, to offer education means to build that upon a psychosocial walking with, the psychosocial work that so many people need. One of the projects I'm most proud of is our educational work in Lebanon, working with Syrian children who have often been out of school for 2, 3, or 4 years, getting them at sort of a quick catch-up program, getting them ready to go into the Syrian school system. Into the Lebanese school system, which is taught in English and French rather than Arabic. Each one of our schools has a social worker because the children bear the scars of having left Syria. And as those of you who have taught to understand what a child's problem is, you meet his or her parents and you get the bigger picture. The social work component, that healing component, is an essential part of the education that we do for people facing emergencies. When Father Arrupe first started JRS, our educational effort was teaching Vietnamese the English language so that when they were resettled, they would have a head start up. And I think, as many of us know, the Vietnamese resettlement was one of the most successful resettlement opportunities in our history. At this point, the education that we do tries to be sensitive to the needs of the people and tries to deal with those psychosocial realities. Let me just give our work in Chad as a sort of a snapshot of the various things we do. There in Chad, working with refugees from Darfur. If we go our minds back to 2002, 2003, remember those horrible scenes of people fleeing Darfur in the Sudan? They went to the Western Chad and they are still there. There's now a process of integrating them more into the Chadian society, which we're really happy with and participating in. And so our education really takes on that focus. We work at the childcare level, working with a small nonprofit in LA who has developed a sort of a pond model for home-based childcare, offering training and economic opportunities for the women who do that. In collaboration with the UN, we take care of primary education there. In collaboration with the U.S. State Department, we are coordinating all of the secondary education for Darfurian refugees in eastern Chad. And private funders enable us to make the difference. I think all of us right now are very interested in making sure that girls have equal educational opportunities. The most important thing that enables a young woman to stay in school is menstrual hygiene management. If she does not have a safe place once a month, she will drop out. And so we've got I'm very excited about the very, very fine program which we've developed there through the sponsorship of someone who went to a Jesuit school many, many years ago. In addition to that, we are doing a lot of teacher training, both at the post-secondary level, giving young people the skills they need to become teachers, and an innovative program with the Chadian government. They still have what they call normal schools, and after 3 years in a normal school, you can get a teaching certificate, which enables you to teach anywhere in the country. We are having cohorts of 40 people who have been prepared by us to take on this university level. The first group will graduate next summer. They will be able to teach anywhere in the country. This is what we feel we have to be doing. It's important to do, to give this refugee community from Darfur the chance to integrate and the chance to really succeed in a country which has become their home. Human, spiritual. We are fundamentally a Catholic organization. We are a ministry of the Society of Jesus. That being said, 70% of the people we serve are non-Christians. Over half the people we serve are Muslim. So how does that spiritual piece fit, you might ask? One thing I've come to realize in meeting refugees is that almost all of them have a deep sense of God's providence. As difficult as the world might be for them, the fact that they are still there, the fact that they are alive and have hopes for something better, they experience as the presence of God. And we as JRS want to and need to nurture that. And nurture that across boundaries, across faiths. How do we do that? We make sure that all of our staffs are made up of mixed groups, Christian and Muslim and Yazidi, for example, in northern Iraq, where we are working. We always do our best to work with the faith groups themselves, to work with members of a mosque, to work with members of a church. There's a sense of community which people bring that enables the work we do to have better effect. Some agencies feel that they can't deal with that part of their lives, that they have to deal with people individually. And we have found out it offers more dignity and respect to acknowledge that somebody is part of a worshiping community and to engage them as members of worshiping communities. And finally, this whole focus on spirituality opens up a key area for us right now, that of reconciliation. As you may know, in the last general congregation, the Jesuits who elected Father Arturo Sosa as the new general specifically said that reconciliation needs to be the primary focus of the work that we as the society are doing. Reconciling people with God, with one another, and with the earth. I think this work that we do with refugees, especially in helping host and refugee communities come together, in helping people from different faiths living in the same context, and sometimes what it means to live down the street from somebody who killed some members of your family in a different place, in a different time. Reconciliation is so critical if we're going to be able to move beyond this refugee crisis. Finally, what does this mean for all of us? And I don't have an answer to that. I don't live here, you live here. What I do want to say, though, is I mentioned our motto of being a company, serve, and advocate. Advocacy is something which I think we really profoundly want to teach refugees to do, to enable those women and men to speak out of their own experience and out of their own voice. But I think it's also important for us, as we reflect on the situation of forcibly displaced people in the world, of realizing that they are indeed our sisters and brothers, that Matthew 25 is a key part of our understanding of our call, as brothers and sisters in the Lord. What does that mean in this world? Certainly at the political level, there's a lot of negative noise these days, but I would also say there are a lot of positive and incredibly hopeful stories going on when you get below that. It is in coming to know someone that we find out that the stories are real and that we have so much in common. It's the experience of sharing, breaking bread with one another that we understand someone else's lives and understand that refugees are really like us. Let me end there and open it up to questions, but just to basically say thank you again for your time. Thank you for listening to a little bit about JRS, which I really believe is a key expression of the Society's mission these days. And thank you for being here, and I look forward to any questions or comments you might have. Thank you. I think there's a microphone coming.
There's a microphone right here.
Excellent.
So I'm here to field everyone's questions, and what a great opportunity for all of you. So please go ahead, just raise your hand. There, good. Oh, you have one? All right. I'll get Frank first, and then you.
Father Time, you mentioned some other agencies that are different from JRS, and it almost sounded competitive, but I'm sure it's not. Can you talk about how you do all work together, the different Catholic Relief Service, I think that's another one, are those different agencies? Thanks.
Sure. So thank you for that question. Now, in all candor, we are all frenemies. Because, as you can guess, there's never enough money to do everything that we would want to do. And I would say, and I mean this quite seriously, the competitive area is really in terms of government funding. We're all looking to various governments and the UN for funding. Those are inherently competitive structures. Beyond that, I actually think we do our best to work together. You specifically brought up CRS, Catholic Relief Services. They are one of our most important partners. We just started to work in Nigeria last month, specifically working in the northeastern quadrant of the country where the Boko Haram crisis has created huge numbers of internally displaced people, and even there are now refugees coming from Chad and Cameroon trying to find safety there. The new provincial of the Northwest Africa province invited JRS to come. He said, we've got this crisis going on, we don't know what to do, could you help us? We did a needs assessment there. We talked with CRS. CRS was doing a lot of livelihoods work, which is basically giving people skills training, but they said, we don't do education and we need somebody to be doing education. So we've begun our project there under their aegis, using initially their infrastructure to begin education programs, which started last month. We hope that our next step there will be working. There's a huge number of orphans because of this issue. Again, young people who have been sort of left in this never land of camps. And we've already started talking with some other agencies who have some experience in working with this need. So I say fundamentally we are collaborative, but there are those delicate moments where we have to kind of gird our loins, if I can use that, and all of us know that this is just part of it. That being said, I think there is a pretty good sense of collaboration in most of these situations, because people realize that nobody can fix all of the problems. Everybody brings a different contribution. Everybody brings something different to these crises.
We have a question here.
Thank you. Hi, obviously JRS works on a global scope. Mm-hmm. I just was wondering what thoughts you might have or parallels you might see closer to here, where I think one of the big issues we see is economic and, refugees from economic and crime from south of the border coming up, and obviously in Detroit we have a substantial, Hispanic population. I'm just wondering what thoughts you might have on the situation of around here.
So I'm not from around here. so I'm going to be very delicate in what I would say. First of all, JRS is not a resettlement agency. So we are not primarily working with refugees or forcibly displaced people who have been settled into different countries. Our work is primarily in that in-between place between where people have left and wherever they might be going. And sometimes they don't wind up going anywhere. So from a JRS point of view, I'm not gonna, I don't have much to say. What I would say is one of the programs which was started by JRS USA, we have 10 regional offices. One of them is in DC. Claire Bonsignore is here with me. She is the Director of Development for our office there. Has one of the projects that they started was, which has now become independent, is called the Kino Border Initiative. It's in Nogales, Arizona, Nogales, Mexico, a collaborative effort of Jesuits on both sides of the border, the diocese on both sides of the border, religious communities, and a number of Jesuit schools and parishes have been sending delegations down there. Let me just say two things of what I can say. We are working on the Guatemalan-Mexican border, working with people who are fleeing the violence in the northern triangle of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. People fleeing drug stuff, from our point of view, are refugees. They're being forced to leave, forced to find a place of safety. I have visited there. I've talked to people. The stories are actually quite horrible. The second thing is, I'm not an open border believer. I don't believe that everybody comes in and sort of moves wherever they want. But I think the third thing that we have to do, I think as a country, and as a country especially with our own roots, is to realize that there are people out there right now, people at our border, who have a need of protection. They need safety. Having talked to the folks who have crossed the border into Guatemala, many of them are being followed. They need safety. They need a new start. And I think we have an obligation as a civic culture and also as people of faith to at least hear those requests seriously. Now, again, does that mean we take everybody? I don't think so, though some would do that. But I think those who have a need of protection, we have an obligation to protect, whether they be from Latin America, whether they be from wherever. That's what we are called to do. Thanks.
We have a question here.
Father Smolich,
Yes.
I'm just wondering about, you're in so many countries. Who are the staff on the ground that works with all of these refugees?
Sure. Thank you. We have about 70 Jesuits, so in most countries there is a Jesuit somewhere, not always. We are blessed to have a number of women religious who are part of our work, especially in Africa and parts of Asia. So it's nice when we've got that presence. Our professional staff, more often than not, are people from the country itself, or perhaps an adjoining country. Our goal is to have about 10% of the country office or the country staff be international, to give a sense of sort of a belonging to a bigger operation and it's also a way to, I would say, improve the quality of staff and the quality of our culture by making sure that it's open to a variety of people. Legally, we cannot hire refugees. I'm not going to go into that, but we can offer them stipends. We can call them incentive workers. So a lot of the people who are working with us in the field are actually refugees themselves. They might be teaching. They might be helping us to organize communities. In some cases, they're actually doing psychosocial work with us. We have a number of volunteers of people who, the way that I would put it is, if they weren't there, we would hire someone to take their place. They will typically work on a minimum, like a Jesuit volunteer kind of way for a year. If they want to stay, and if we want them to stay, we'll try and move them into a staff position, typically. And then we have interns. We're blessed right now with connections with a number of schools. The one that comes to mind most obviously is Boston College's School of Social Work. We have master's students who do their project with us in a number of different places. We've had students in Kakama refugee camp in Kenya. We've had students in our home office in Rome who are working on staff care. So those are other opportunities. And younger people like that keep us fresh and bring innovation into the work that we are doing. Welcome.
We have a question here.
Yes. Thank you. Welcome to Detroit, Father.
Thank you.
You very much for visiting and sharing your considerable insights with us. You mentioned that there are roughly 68 million refugees in our world today. That leads me to conclude that no matter how big your team is, the demand to serve far outweighs the number of people serving.
Sure.
So the question is twofold. How do you prepare people, as well-intentioned and with servant hearts they may be, for what lies ahead in the service? Mm-hmm. And I think more importantly, how do you sustain that commitment? When you continually get exposed to need at that level, you can have exhaustion, you can have cynicism, and then you can have rank judgmentalism of those people. Yeah. How do you work to mitigate that or prevent it?
Thank you. It's an interesting question because if I can go back to 1980 when we started, I often get this question, well, would Father Arrupe approve of what you were doing today? And I say, I don't think Father Arrupe even thought we were going to be around today. But our DNA back then was Jesuits and volunteers. It was the sort of missionaries slash through the jungle and kind of set something up. And it was a model, frankly, which had a rather short lifespan because volunteers come and go and Jesuits would stick around until they wore out and then you'd put somebody else in. That doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work because the needs of refugees, these are long-term crises now, not quickly solved things, most of them. And also people are with us and you can't sort of churn people and expect to have a good quality of work. The preparation, I would say, back to the other question, the majority of our staff are actually local people who have some experience, some relevance to what's actually going on. And typically, it's the staff who provide the best orientation. And we try to specifically have some sort of an orientation for new people at the country level as opposed to the project level to make sure that there is some basic stuff on that. The other question is actually the tougher one. I would say that most of the people that we work with that are in JRS are people of faith, whatever that faith might be, not all. Everybody certainly has a humanitarian desire. So I think if you don't believe in the mission and what we're doing, you'll go find a better paying job somewhere else, frankly. But I think the other thing is, and back to something I was saying, one of the things that I've been trying to bring in is a real sense of staff care. That if we do not care for the people that are working for us, working with us, then we're doing as much damage to them as has been done to others. I use the word accompaniment of refugees. I'm trying to say this is the verb that we need to use with everybody in the JRS family. I'll be honest with you, we always haven't done a good job with it. Too many people have been burned out, and too many people have been, I think, hurt, wounded, because the human suffering that they experienced, they didn't have anywhere to go with it. So for me, one of the critical things that we're trying to put into place is that every staff, everywhere there's a place of safety, someone of safety who can be, in a sense, be that place. The interesting thing, and I'm showing my age here, the younger people all want to do this on an app. So we have to find an app where you can say, I'm feeling good today, and this is okay. And then beyond that, and we have therapists working with us, we have counselors, we have social workers. The other thing I also want to build up is the mission and identity piece of our work. I want people to know deeply what our vision is and what Father Arrupe's vision is, so that also is a motivating factor in what they do and why they stay. I appreciate the question because we're not there yet, and we need to get better. Thanks.
So I know we're wrapping things up, but I promise this last question.
I'm glad you got to, because you've had your hand up
Hi.
since the
Thank you,
beginning.
Father. Since you talked about how Jesuit Relief Services deals with the people in between, from where they're escaping to where they hope to go, can you talk about how politics and government and the current White House administration has really cut back on the number of refugees accepted here in the U.S. and how that impacts your work? Here in the Detroit area, it's essentially meant the Archdiocese of Detroit has had to close down its relief resettlement, and it'd be interesting to hear how that impacts your work. Thank you.
So I'm going to phrase this somewhat differently. This is an issue not just in this country. It's an issue all over the world, or in many parts of the developed world. This is an issue. And it's expressed often as fear of these people. The facts, of course, don't bear out the fear. 85% of forcibly displaced people are in the developing world. They are not in Europe. They're not in Australia. They're not in this country. I think, as most of us know, crime rates are lower among immigrant communities and refugee communities than they are in local communities. But there's something else. There's a fear there. And we're in a moment, I think, where a lot of leadership is playing into that fear. And the fear is a very persuasive motivator. And fear, which is not, in a sense, analyzed or carefully thought through, can often become an anxiety, an overreaction to what's there, and it's not an accurate reaction. And I think a lot of what we're experiencing, or people's attitudes, are in a sense, have gone off that level. I would say two things generally, and I don't want to comment on the situation here particularly. I'm living in Italy, which now has leadership which is saying actually rather similar things. The first thing is that beyond, there is this level of rhetoric at the government level. And if you go below that, my experience is people continue to open their doors, people continue to open their hearts. And I think it's really important that those of us who do that and want to do that and want to see that continue to say so. That even though for various reasons people may want to close this down, there are others of us who recognize that this is what we should be doing, whether it be for economic reasons, whether it be for moral reasons, religious reasons, humanitarian reasons. People need a sense of safety. So I think that's the sort of fundamental. Has it changed the situation? I would honestly say yes. In many countries that we work in, going to America, to a lesser extent Australia, Canada, was always seen as, winning the big prize. And it was seen as possible because at least the numbers were out there and you could say that this. I think it's changed people's calculus of what's possible. And I'm sad for that. Because again, not everybody was going to get to the States. But it's very interesting. In a sense, preparing to come to the States, people worked hard. People got education. People did things, in a sense, which made them better candidates. And I'm afraid that people, without seeing hope, I can't go back home and I can't go back here. I think there's a potential not helpful current that could run through. I think if you look at this historically, we've been through these periods. Certainly our country has been through these periods. And I think this is a long-term struggle, a long-term conversation. And what I tell people, well, how do we change this? I say two things. This is fundamentally a conversion. You can talk at this level, but ultimately this calls for a conversion. And secondly, the best way to change somebody's heart or somebody's mind is to meet somebody and talk with a refugee, to talk with an immigrant, and to come to realize that my story looks a lot like her story, looks a lot like his story, and we have much more in common than we do than what separates us. It's a conversion, it's a human process, and I encourage all of us to engage that as we can. Thanks very much. Thank you.